Hey, what's up, everybody? It's your boy Montoya Smith, aka Black Socrates. Haven't been going live in a long time, but I wanted to kind of get this off my chest. I probably should have dropped this last week sometime, but it's on my heart. We had the Mr. Dialogue Live experience this past Friday, and we discussed the future of the black vote. And today is voting in the primaries. I still need to go vote, if you will. And during that discussion, um, talking about the future of the black vote, it wasn't necessarily said at night, but it was addressed, the idea of vote or die, that campaign that was existed with Puffy and them, some years ago or whatever. And so something that we'll commonly say, specifically in the African American community, is that people died for your right to vote. And it's kind of used to a degree as a pressure tactic to get people or to push people to vote, because the unfortunate reality is during the primaries, very few people vote, all Americans, if you will, and African Americans seem to even less. And so in the dialogue on Friday, we had a couple of people campaigning. She's campaigning for a school board, and she was highlighting that her opportunity to get on the school board only existed during the primaries. It was actually in their particular county, the school board positions were taken off the general elections, if you will. And so that prompted a dialogue about being how certain groups can be strategic about the vote and take advantage of the fact that certain groups don't really vote during the primary. So sometimes people can kind of gear up and says, all right, we're gonna run this person and get them in during the primaries, because we know most people will just kind of disregard the primaries because they're so focused on the general election with, if you will, Trump and Biden, which is what people typically pay attention to, and miss out on the opportunity to strategically take advantage of the primaries, if you will. But back to the title of this discussion, if you will, when I say stop saying that people died for your right to vote, it came up during the Mental Dialogue Live experience on Friday, because I was explaining during that dialogue that terminology falls on deaf ears to young people. And some people were stressing, well, they need to know that that's why they must vote. And I'm like, that type of pressure does not resonate. You have to connect the vote to some actual objective or something that actually happened to be more effective. And so today I was just thinking about, as I was preparing to, as I'm preparing to go vote, I was just thinking about in my lifetime, the things that I've seen actually voting change, and the things that it affect. I've seen it decide whether a bus line was going to come to a county or not. I've seen whether a certain school district was going to have a head start or not. Like, the difference in the vote can make a difference. I remember when I went to school in Colorado, there was the decision on a penny tax, if it was in a sense going to assist with the Broncos building a new stadium. The people voted it down, and so because quite often, speaking of stadium, these billionaires, if you will convince the fans to, in a sense, assist with the building of a stadium. But there's been plenty of studies now. This is, even for the uptick that may come with with having a stadium in a city, it's not necessarily beneficial to the entire community as much as it's beneficial to that billionaire's pocket. And so that's not me telling you which way to go. If you're ever in a city that comes up, I just remember when it was shot down back in Denver years ago. Um, I remember my godmother being on city council making specific decisions. To make sure certain roads got paved in my small town where we didn't. And there were certain areas, kind of outskirts, that didn't have paved roads. So that type of decision was based on having a representative on the council to kind of say, hey, this area needs this. And had she not been representing our area, there wouldn't have been anyone on the city council to even suggest that this certain area needs this, because nobody else on that council was from our area. So that's why they say representation is important, and it is important. So I'm just highlighting some things that I specifically remember the vote making a difference on. There's so many different things, and I'm just highlighting these examples to say that's the dialogue you want to have if you're trying to, in a sense, bring your young person up and convince them to be a part of voting, if you will. And even for some of us adults who've kind of slack and are part of the reason why the numbers are down in the primary so bad, because you know you go in the booth and it's like, who am I voting for, if you will. And so I will always encourage people to look up the women's league. They will have information on your local candidates. That's kind of typically what I do, is I go see who's on the ballot, and they will, if there are public debates and things like that, women league will gather that information, so you can kind of try to see the positions on different people or whatever. And then highlighting on Friday, and I won't keep this going too long, but highlighting on Friday, one of the candidates was running for Superior Court judge, and just highlighting that judges make the decision on whether people that come before them get alternative um, opportunities versus going to jail or whatever. you talked about the fact that you can't lock up a criminal problem. Like you got to put in alternatives that are more effective to ensure that even if somebody ends up going to jail, that they can come back and be a productive citizen of society. And to a degree, we get so dismissive of those that we've thrown away in it, thrown away in the prison system, if you will. The recidivism is super high, and so um, you know, to the candidate's point, people become lifelong criminals versus getting a skill set to be effective citizens in the community. So you want to have judges in position who understand that, and I've seen that directly in the in the court before. Had a situation where I had to go to the court and on some BS or whatever, but watching the cases before me, I remember seeing the sister here in Clayton County just beautifully and magically handle the cases of some young people who were literally misguided. I'm not talking about slap on the wrist. It was just she literally walked them through. Here's what you want to do, and versus just saying, "Hey, here's your penalty." She really said, "Hey, go get a test. This situation right here, it'll help you." Like creating those alternatives to just simply punishment. And so, imagine we always talk about that issue in our community. Well, if you're not participating in the primary and putting people, or as we were warned on Friday, voting all the way down the ballot, in other words, paying attention to who those people are in those positions, you may be sending our youth before people who don't look like them, who don't care about them, and punishment is the only thing that's in their mind. So that's the power of the vote locally, way more so than being concerned about the general election of the President of the United States. Who the President of the United States affects you much less than all of the people that you can elect during the primaries that unfortunately too many don't go and consider voting. And quite often it's because we're trying to drive, particularly our young people there, with this concept of somebody died for your right to vote. And while that is true, and I'm absolutely respectful of history, if anybody knows me, I adore the fact that we are standing on the shoulders of giants who actually sacrificed their lives for us to have an opportunity to participate in the political system, which our ancestors absolutely understood. That's why the civil rights movement, I always tell people, was more about equal protection of the law than anything else. It wasn't about simply integrating with white people. The more important thing was, if I establish something, we don't want a random person to come and destroy it, and there be no recompense in the legal system. So therefore, we had to get representation in order to get equal protection of the law. Now, of course, there are plenty of lawyers out there who fight near and dear to ensure that that is done with fairness, but at the same time, we can politically put people in judgeship, if you will, that can actually keep that in mind, come from the community, and understand the difference versus just looking at someone as just a criminal because of political narratives that have been put out there, or misinformation or false narratives that have been put out there about one demographic over the other. So I hope I've given some encouragement to speak to specific things that the vote made a difference in. And I don't care. I will say this. I always have to say this. I am a political independent. And so also we don't want to include not only the idea that you must vote because somebody died for your right to vote. Well, that's disingenuous if you're pushing that, also telling that person which party they must vote for. At the end of the day, diversity of the vote amongst the party actually gets the parties to pay more attention. So I'm also just throwing it out here as a secondary note before I close this out. I am not a fan of the African American community specifically being all for one party or the other. I am absolutely a political independent, and I would encourage more of you to do so. Go get on the women's league, figure out who's running your candidate in your local area, and find out what they're about. Whatever the issues are important to you. So believe it or not, sometimes that that the things that are important to you, believe it or not, that could be in a candidate on either side of the aisle. So that's just my personal take, and I think it effectively ensures that the black vote is taken more seriously. So again, that's a whole other conversation for another day. But at the end of the day, we have to do better, in my opinion, than just telling our young people and others, if someone died for your right to vote, if all you're doing is going into the voting booth and voting blindly, what's the difference? And that's how a lot of young people and other people who now decided to no longer participate in the system say, well, if I don't know who I'm voting for, what's the difference if I go and vote? So that's a fair, logical conversation. So again, if you know of specific differences that voting for, whether it was a particular person, or like I said, putting a judge who actually could consider our, because again, some of the positions, plenty of positions are nonpartisan. So with that said, it's not even a matter of whether they're Democrat or Republican or not. It's a matter of getting people that look like you in your community. Matter of fact, I'll say one more thing. That was one of the questions that was asked at the live experience on Friday. Like, what's the issue with this county over this county? And what was correctly pointed out was that there's, in a majority black county, for example, speaking of the judgeship, the majority of the judges are not black. And I'm not saying that that alone is the issue, but again, how do they relate to a community that they're not part of? It becomes easy just to delay, for example, delay cases. Like that's the type of thing that someone who understands or been in the field as it was recommended. If you put someone else who understands what's going on in the community, they can ensure once they're in that position that that backlog gets cut down. All of that stuff matters, which is a matter of your right to a speedy trial. You know, that makes me think of, Khalif Browder, that brother that ended up killing himself after spending 3 years up in New York, too long awaiting trial. That stuff can only happen when you have people in judgeship who doesn't care about your community or think of that kind of stuff. So again, connect the vote to actual happenings because it makes a difference of what happens locally. It could be the difference between somebody having a bus to go to a better place to work or only being limited to the areas to the areas they can walk to because a bus system was not voted on. I mean, it's a lot. Again, these are just real life examples on how the vote can empower based on who you vote for or the actual initiatives that are also on the ballot. It has nothing to do with who's in position. It could be the difference between your taxes being higher on your cigarettes or not. As simple as that. Again, connect the dot to something, connect the vote to something directly when you're having a dialogue about how important the vote is. All I ask is that you think.